Let's go ahead and work with containers on the Azure portal. Now there are multiple ways of creating a container. One of them is to go to all services and then in the search box here type container and then you will find container instances. The other easiest option is to just type container in the search box and you will find the same thing. There are other ways as well. For example, you can use an ARM template or a JSON template to build a container instance. In this case, I'll click on Add to create a container instance and follow through the wizard. I select my resource group and then type the container name as, let's say, web app. I will leave the region as it is and then explain image source. We know that image consists of the dependencies for the application itself, and if required, an operating system. That's what an image consists of. Microsoft has these sample images for us to go ahead and test the potential of container instances. So you got Azure Container Instance with a Hello World application. So this image will have the Linux operating system and the binaries required for this application to run. There's another one which has an Nginx application with Linux operating system, and there's a Windows Nano server with IIS configured. Keep in mind that these are just for testing purposes. I'm going to select Hello World here, but let's also try to understand the other two options. So you got Azure Container Registry. Let's say you got a complex application built, and then you want to pack that application into a single image, including its operating system and dependencies, then you will have to keep it in some kind of a repository. That repository is nothing but your Azure Container Registry. I'm going to deviate for a moment and then type Container Registry here, and then you will see that in the drop down menu here in this box. So if I click on it, you'll land up in the Container Registry. You can go ahead and create a container registry and follow through this wizard. Now, once the registry is created, you're ready to host all the images inside this registry or repository. You can use those images to create container instances from ACI. Okay, we are back here. We have selected Azure Container Registry, but then since we do not have any repositories or registries in the ACR, we don't have anything in the drop-down menu. There is another third-party service called as Docker Hub. It is pretty famous and a lot of developers use Docker Hub to host their images. Now you can use a public repository or a private repository. Keep in mind that private registries are charged and it's not free, whereas public repositories are free of cost. So if you know your Docker Hub URL in the public repository, you can just type that URL here. Okay. Now in this case, I will select Quick Images. And then in the drop down, I will leave it as ACI Hello World. Next, the size. You have multiple variations to choose from. Number of CPU cores that you would like to allocate to your container. Amount of memory that you would like to allocate to your container. And if there are any graphic based applications that you're running on your container, then you may want to select those options from the drop down menu. All right. So at this time, since this is a test use case, I will leave it as 1 vCPU and 1.5 gigs of memory. Moving on to the networking part. Containers can have a public or an external facing IP address, and there can be multiple ports that it can be exposed on. You can also assign a DNS label, which is a fully qualified domain name for your web application. This DNS label can then be used by the external clients to reach a container web application. So what you're essentially doing is that you're exposing the container on a particular port on a particular IP address with this DNS name. As you see, you got other options as well. You can choose not to have an IP address at all or have a private IP address to have it routable within your networks in Azure or keep it public. All right. So I will mark it as public at this time and call it as webapp.northeurope.azurecontainer.io. All right. So I'm exposing it on port number 80. But if you have certificates and you would like to encrypt it, you may want to choose 443. Okay. You can have multiple ports as well. But at this time, I'll leave it as 80. Click on next and then check these advanced options. Containers are like small instances that run and host your web application. Now, if there is some kind of a problem, what would you like to do? What is your restart policy is determined here. So when containers fail, would you like them to restart? Or you can leave it as never so that the containers will never restart even if there is a problem, or choose always. Okay, so I will leave it as on failure, which is what's recommended. Let's talk about environment variables. Setting the environment variables in your container instances allows you to provide dynamic configuration for your application or probably the script as well that is running in the container. You would essentially pass the key and its value as an environment variable. For example, you can say number equals 5 or max value equals 20 or case equals true. So I'm just typing randomly some values here, and these values can then be used in our configuration of an application or inside the script. So I do not have to specify these keys 100 times and the respective values another 100 times in the script. So they will just refer to these environment variables. Usage of environment variables is not new. We have been using these in operating systems and in applications as well. But here in container instances, this is one of the methods to pass the environment variables. Moving forward, when we learn about creating container instances using CLI, I'll show you how you can pass these environment variables using the CLI as well. Let's talk about command override. When you initially start your containers, you may want to execute some kind of a bash script or a shell script. Command override is nothing but a placeholder where you can put your script here. Okay. So if you type echo hello, it's gonna execute echo hello at runtime when the containers start. All right. So next is tags, and then finally review and create. It's gonna run through the validation, and I'll click on create.